because we're three of us here are huge fans of cities. Alex is pretty obvious with his attaché travel. Me, I don't have such an outlet, but it's one of my favorite topics, actually. So I think for the audience, it will be not only about aviation, but about our feelings, cities, what they evoke to us.
Yeah. We are urbanists, I think. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
And we haven't rehearsed anything with Alex, obviously. That's what we do. We never rehearse.
And I wish I had hard copies to bring you. I would have given you some hard copies
kind
tomorrow.
of you to send us the
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. It's my kind of book.
Yeah, me too. I loved it. Actually, I loved it. I remember you were telling us that you were hesitating. Is that a good content for the podcast? I'm like,
dude,
right?
Yeah,
of course it is. You were not going to hear this. No, it's not, of course, playing when I want to play it. Come on.
I just want to tell you both good luck. We're all counting on you.
The both good luck and counting on you, which just played, so it means that it's recording. You guys have probably heard that there's a third voice in the podcast. Hello, Mark.
Hello. Hi, guys.
welcome back.
It's been a while. You've been. I just realized last night I was researching when was the last time we recorded. That was episode 60, and I think that was 60, right, Alex? In 2017, the airport was Nairobi. Although now that I've read your book, and that's the topic of today, we should have been Cape Town because you spent so much time talking about Cape Town. I don't know why we chose Nairobi back then.
We could choose Cape Town today, then, shall we?
Yeah. And the first step for those who are interested, who might have not heard you, was episode 40. And we did Heathrow, because obviously that's where you fly from as a BA pilot. And we were talking about Skyfaring, which was your first book. One tidbit, you've done the 3 era of our show, because the first one we had our first intro and first logo, the second one our second intro and the second logo, and now you are in this free-falling, we do whatever we want with a new type of music, which I'm going to play now very quickly for again, can I? Again, the usual shout-out. And so, the most amazing thing is that we are actually in the same room.
That's weird.
I'm looking at Alex right now.
We've never. I mean, how many episodes have we done? 685. Even in the 100+ episodes, we've done one in the same room, and it wasn't very good.
That was a catastrophe.
Yeah, the sound sucked.
Yeah, that was at my place at the very beginning, and we had one microphone in the middle. We didn't know how to do it, and the sound was horrible. I think it was Vienna. Yeah. Did we not even record 2 at the same time?
I think we did. Oh God,
it was a disaster.
The ambitiousness of youth, I think.
But it's very nice also to be in the same room. I mean, we met, Mark.
Yeah, of course. It is a real pleasure to be in the same room and to look out at London and see people walking by and taxis going by, and it's a nice feeling.
So, I'm super loud suddenly. The book. Let's start with the book, maybe. Do you want to maybe tell us the title of the book and why did you write it? I mean, we've both read it. We have so many questions. Yeah. We're recording, I need to say that, we're recording today, May 11th, May 11th, 2022. The book is coming out tomorrow, May 12th, and that's when this episode will be released. So there's no embargo by that time. Guys in the US, you will have to wait for a couple of months before it comes out. So sorry, you'll have to listen to this in July. So Mark, please tell us about your new book.
So the title of the book is Imagine a City, and it's really about my love for cities and how that kind of was entwined with the love of airplanes that allow us to go to so many. I grew up in a city called Pittsfield in the western part of Massachusetts. It's a pretty small place. It's barely a city in terms of population, and it's in many ways a wonderful place. And I grew up there, kind of spinning my light up globe in my bedroom, looking at the names of the cities all around the world, and thinking about the planes that might take me there someday.
Well, you had a Star Wars poster.
That Star Wars poster is from the guy with the kids who moved there.
Yeah, with the kids, exactly.
Yeah, it wasn't my poster. Yeah, but, that was from the people who bought the house after us.
Yes.
But yeah, I had posters of airliners. Basically, I had Boeing cockpit, glowing sort of night shots of Boeing cockpits. So my love for big cities began in a very small one, and it was really inseparable from my love of airplanes. I think those kind of things grew up together. So I became a pilot, and I was given an experience of cities that was far more fascinating and even miraculous than I could ever have imagined when I was a kid. We see so many cities from above. If you're at a window seat, especially at night, and there are parts of the world that are quite dark at night, but there are many parts where it's just one city after another is scrolling past, these glowing kind of nests of light on the earth below us, and they're just. I came back from Toronto last week, and we took off from Pearson towards the northeast and made a left turn and then another right turn, and it was maybe 10 or 10:30 at night, and we could look down at Toronto, and it was just glowing, these miniaturized towers on this, and then this dark lake. I mean, and the city looked like a blade, like on the lake. It was just unbelievable. And when you mentioned Star Wars, when we look at cities. When we look at cities in science fiction and we think, oh, wow, that looks futuristic. Well, Toronto looked pretty remarkable to me, I have to say. And it certainly provides the language, the sort of urban language, the visual language that all of our imaginations are using in things like Star Wars when they make cities. And then, 40 minutes later, Montreal goes by, and then Quebec. And, 5 hours later, we're coming in over Canary Wharf on a beautiful, almost summer-like morning to land at Heathrow. And so there's that amazing experience we have of cities from the air, but there's also another experience of cities once we land in them. And as a long haul pilot, you might have 24 hours in a city, maybe up to 72 hours. And we have we're given this kind of really unusual experience of cities where we go to them again and again for these short periods, and we're never really, when I go to a city as a traveler. I kind of think, okay, well, what are the sites I have to see? But when you go as a pilot, you're going to be back again in a month or two.
That must be wonderfully reassuring.
Yeah, it makes travel really kind of relaxing and more organic in some ways. And some cities we go to so many times that you start to feel a little bit at home in them. I talk in the book about how I've been to Los Angeles, 60 or 70 times. And I have like whole routines there. I have cafes I go to and places I go for a bike ride and a hike. And often
you mentioned, sorry to interrupt, you almost mentioned at some point you have to remind yourself, and I think Alex and I experience the same thing, that this is not your city.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Like you go so many times, you got your habits, like you just said, like so maybe a coffee or maybe even like the same path you take every time because it feels familiar. And you have to kind of...
And when I pass tourists in that city, I kind of like walk past them quickly as they're holding their maps. And then I'm like, I'm acting like I live here, but I don't live here. And, you take LA again, often I'll meet people from LA somewhere else in the world and they'll say, oh, they're from Los Angeles. And I'll be like, oh, LA. And then I have to, and I'm almost about to say I'm from LA too, but of course that's not true. It's not true at all. And I wanted to capture that sense of cities. I think half of us live in cities, now, and by 2050, 2/3 of us will. Cities are a defining part of who we are as a species, really, and of our civilization. And I wanted to capture the unique sense of pilots have of that, both from above and from within their streets. And I guess the last element I wanted to capture in Imagine a City was this sense of home and the way that my first city, Pittsfield, that small place, is kind of always with me, no matter where I am. And I don't know if you guys had a similar experience, but when I first logged on to, I guess, Google Earth or Google Maps, and you could first look down at a map of a mapped photograph, whatever you want to call it, of the world. And I was in London when I did that. I remember I was on the couch and I didn't go look at the Sydney Opera House. I didn't go look at Stonehenge. I didn't go look at the Statue of Liberty. I went straight back to my childhood street. And I zoomed right in, and I went and I found the street, and I saw the house, and I saw the shape of the garage and the drive and the lawn and the shadows on the lawn at the time the photograph was taken by the satellite, And I looked at that house belonged to somebody else, to another family. And I looked down on the shingles of that roof, and I was like, and I went to the corner of the roof that I knew was above my bedroom. And I had this kind of like, wow, this kind of bewildered sense of like distance and connection and time all at once. And this, trying to capture or trying to think about a place that meant so much to me. And maybe another way to say it is, I don't know if you've had the experience of coming up from a subway station in New York, and it takes you a minute to realize where you are in the intersection, and it's quite apparent there because there's a grid. But if you don't know which way the avenue runs, which are one way, it takes you a second to realize which way you are, which way you're facing, which way you have to walk to get to wherever you're going.
Yeah.
And I have a very strong sense when I do that, and I have that moment of confusion, that I'm looking for where the sun is, and I'm trying to map, because my bedroom in my childhood home faced east, and so I can almost feel like that map of home and of directions kind of swiveling in my brain into little lines, and only then do I kind of know where I'm going. And I don't know. I feel like cities. Your first city it's like a parent almost, or even a language that you carry with you. And then in this book, I wanted to, I was talking to a friend about it. A lot of people helped me with this book. There were the acknowledgements are very long.
Yes.
And I really wanted to make sure I thanked everyone who helped me. But, one friend who read it was like, well, it's not really, this book isn't really about cities, is it? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it's about home. This is a book about home.
I think that's also what I saw, probably Alex too. I felt, because it talked to me a lot, the book, because your story, even of course widely different, it's a mix of wanderlust and fernweh, so wanting to go somewhere else, but also the somewhere else appealing to you, and having this kind of huge loop that I've experienced, that I almost left my hometown because I wanted to get away from it. But at some point, it not only catches up with you, but it is you, actually.
Yeah.
And it takes time to realize that actually it will always be me. But you have to maybe go through that experience. I mean, maybe not everyone, but for me, I had to go through that experience of living abroad and being a forever foreigner, to understand that actually I will always be my roots.
Yeah.
And that city, Geneva, was small, not as small as Pittsfield, but...
same elevation, though.
Yeah.
Or almost.
And that's how I read the book. That's why I was fascinated. You use also a process, the way you wrote it, because you just talked about cities, but it's really a book about you as well, because it's how you feel in the cities, and you have this. It reminded me of one of my favorite books, which is called A Fish in the Sea by Mario Vargas Llosa. And every 2 chapters, he writes about his childhood, and every other chapter he writes about, it's totally different. He's not a pilot. He was
sounds a very, like a pattern I also stumbled across. Yeah.
Yeah, use not chapters exactly, but you use that, and I really enjoyed that, because you mix very well the thread of leaving home, the home staying with you, having all these like puzzles, and since we don't know your story, we kind of learning over time. And when we reach the end of the book, you have like this kind of whole story, and you kind of look back into why you love stories. I love cities. I really loved it. Sorry, I interrupted you with that.
No. I mean, I think that experience of wanting to leave home is a really fundamental one. I mean, I think it probably made sense even genetically, right? That we would want to set out at least a little bit before we come back, or find a new place, or come back to the first one. But the experience that pilots have of cities, of going to so many cities and seeing so many from above, that in a way I'm like an extreme test case of that phenomenon you're talking about, where if anyone could truly leave their home behind, it would be a pilot. But my experience shows that at least to me, that you can't. It is with you. How do you guys feel about have you been to your childhood homes? Your parents maybe even still live in them, or
Alex is a very.
I have led a nomadic life, but the small city in California where I spent the first 10 years of my life is the place that I think of as at least spiritual home. And actually, when you were saying that, I was thinking that the real litmus test is that when I go to a city, Hong Kong, which is probably up there for me, at least in terms of emotional investment and comfort, when an institution, or at least an institution in my mind, is no longer there, be it a restaurant or a shop, it's disappointing. When the same thing happens in the town in which you grew up, it is truly distressing.
Yeah.
It is like that piece of nostalgia has evaporated. Something that was so consistent that you couldn't possibly conceive of your life without it is no more. And I think that for me is the comfort in the permanence, and the memories is still there, but is what kind of separates this little town in California from anywhere else on earth that I had become enamored.
Yeah, I mean, I quote in my book a lot Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities, which has obviously been a huge point of reference to me since I first read it, and and that sense in which maybe it's all the same city. There's 52 cities, but maybe they're all the same. That sense that each city kind of exists. It exists almost first of all in the imaginations of those who live in it or who remember it, and I really wanted to capture that in the book, and that's that's very apparent to me when I'm even if I think of the city I know best, it's probably London, but I've kind of tried this a few times as a thought experiment. If you kind of close your eyes and think how much of it you could draw, there's probably like 10 or 20 streets really well. And then where this cafe is, and then this restaurant, and then this underground station. But then you kind of move in your mind just a little bit off those main streets, and you realize how it kind of fades in a quite organic way into absence. And then if you go a little farther, it reconnects to somewhere else.
Yeah.
And childhood homes that experience is, they add time to that kind of geographic dimension, because I walk around my hometown of Pittsfield, and I am seeing things. I'm passing a building which has where there's like a bank, like a modern little branch bank there, and then I'm thinking, well, that used to be a car dealership with this weird round roof. And I remember going with my dad when he was looking at a Ford there, and there are people. I left Pittsfield. For college, I left 30 years ago. I've been back many times, but there are people there who are 30 years old who've never seen that building. And I'm walking around, and all I can feel is its absence, and that way in which home is a multi-layered into both time and space is a dimension.
I drive my kids crazy with that, walking down the streets going, I remember when this was, and then I'm like, oh my God, what have I become?
I'm lucky with Geneva, because Geneva literally never changes. It's the same city. It's so, your description about Zurich is absolutely fantastic. It feels like a factory, you say, line. It's like so neat. Geneva is not as neat.
That tunnel, yeah.
Yeah, that's all, right? Geneva is not as neat, but it doesn't change. So I go there and I'm like, oh, it's the same cafe. It's actually the same waitress than 20 years ago, and they even recognize me. Say, hello, Papa. Papa used to be my nickname. Everybody would call me Papa. Yeah. And the people are the same. I mean, I get these kind of experiences a lot, which it's reassuring.
It is hugely reassuring.
It's strange, because for a while I wanted to... that's something that I loved when you mentioned that in the book. You said for you, a city when you were young, I'm paraphrasing obviously, was a city with skyscrapers. It had to be big and huge. Yeah, and for me, of course, too, Geneva, we, like you said, in Europe, we don't have a lot of skyscrapers. We have some here in London, in the center, and in Canary Wharf. There's some in Frankfurt, whatever, but we don't have this kind of culture of skyscrapers. So obviously for me, like for you, like I wanted to, New York was the defining city. Yeah. Because back then there was no Dubai or anything. So for me, when I was talking about cities, it was New York. And now with time, with that loop back that I mentioned earlier, you realize that actually all types of cities have their languages. But as a young, impressionable kid, that's all that matters. I wanted to see the highest skyscraper in the world. Yeah, it's like bars on a graph, isn't it? It's, I mean, when we would drive to, we would occasionally take the bus into New York from Pittsfield. It was sort of first like school trips and that kind of thing. And, once you got into Manhattan, and the bus windows were not quite, you couldn't quite see up from the sides. Yeah. But I just remember that sense of like pressing my face against the window of the Peter Pan bus, just to look up at these buildings. And and Boston too. I mean, Boston was our closest city. And it was also the capital of Massachusetts. My dad worked for the state government, so Boston trips are more common. But even as a kid, I understood that New York was a different kind of place. My brother and his, I think I say in the book, like the cool kids in Pittsfield would, they would say, "Oh yeah, we're going to the city this weekend," and nobody thought they were referring to like Albany,
Springfield, Hartford, or in Boston. Everyone just knew it was New York, even though that was the farthest of those.
Yeah.
It was just the city. There's a section in the book where I talk about how much I love it when you see a sign that just says like to city or the city this way or something. And the idea that they're all, either that in some Calvino-esque way, like cities are archetypal, or that from where you are, there's no other city that could be intended. Like at Heathrow at Terminal 5, I think the signs say trains to city.
Yeah.
And no, everybody knows which city they're talking about. And in Cape Town, on the roads around Cape Town, you see these signs. They just say city, and it's like, well,
it's the same in the Bay Area. And when you say, well, I'm going to the city, San Francisco,
really,
even though geographically, population, it's nowhere near the most significant city. San Jose's exponentially bigger. Yeah. And then, of course, Oakland being Oakland is the town.
Right.
So you have those two counterweights. But yeah, there's always that sort of the identifying city of a metropolitan area, which I really like.
The New Rome, so Constantinople, Istanbul. It's apocryphal. No one agrees. But since you mentioned that, it was the city, right? And Istanbul, some people say that's what apocryphal means, Istipolis, which means I'm going to the city.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
Is that not true?
I've looked at it, and it's, you know how it is with these type of things. It gets lost in the history, and also like people want to revisit that history.
I remember coming across that after I finished the book and thinking, wow.
Yeah, because it's a bit,
I really should have put that in there.
It's a big part of your book when you're talking about these new Romes and yeah, so because it was the city. There was even Athens paled. It's a small city comparably, even today, right? Even though we discussed this because Alex just did an attaché travel in Athens, and for me, Athens, Istanbul, and Beirut, I count them as almost not the same city. Obviously, they're very vastly different, but have the same feeling.
Certainly, yeah.
They're like they have a certain opening to the sea. I mean, Athenian friends of mine will tell me that Piraeus only has it, and Athens is more closed in. But they have a kind of similar feeling to them. When I don't know Istanbul that well compared to Beirut and Athens, obviously, but I feel home every time
That's the thing about a city's identity, isn't it? Like, as I said to you, I think, and then in the episode, is that in Athens, actually it was Greg who said it, that you walk around Athens and you're like, this feels like Mexico City.
Really?
Or this feels like Mumbai.
Yeah,
and if somebody said, what is it specifically about this area that feels, I don't know. It just feels like Mexico City. And Mexico City is the same. It's very evocative of lots of different places, but there's some cities like that I feel most at home in.
When you mentioned Sao Paulo, when I first landed in Sao Paulo, 2011, I think I went for the first time. I landed, and within 5 minutes, I'm like, I'm in Manila. I honestly, and to this day, it's the same color, the same air, the same, of course, chaos in a way. It's totally different at the same time. But for me, I read it probably because I had that book before. So you mentioned language. For me, the language was Manila because I lived there. And I arrive there and I feel home just because I don't know why. I cannot explain it. I just feel that it's very, look, I could, every city I could give them a color or a palette, like they have certain colors and for me, Manila and Sao Paulo are exactly the same. Exactly the same in that instant. Of course, it's still very different, right?
But even though we have that individual kind of reaction to cities, there is something about them which is shared as well. I was doing an interview for Imagine a City last week, and we were talking about Lisbon, and the interviewer was actually Portuguese, and I was saying, whenever I heard people say, or read in a travel article, people would say, the city has like, the light of X city or Y city is amazing. I was a little skeptical. It struck me as like maybe a little bit too poetic or a little bit of a reach to say, I'm like, light is light, until I went to Lisbon, and the light there is just unbelievable. It's this, to compare it to other, it feels a little bit like the Bay Area, where it's just that golden, it's like buttery but clear at the same time. And when I walk around Lisbon, the first time I went there as a short haul pilot, I was, and the other reason it's like San Francisco is that they have a bridge there, which is very much like the Golden Gate, although it was designed by the same guy that did the Bay Bridge, not the Golden Gate Bridge. It's weird. There's some, I can't remember all the details there. But the first time I went to Lisbon, I thought, this is what people mean when they say a city has beautiful light. And I was telling this Portuguese woman this last week, and she said, well, in Portuguese, we say Lisbon is the city of light, not the city of lights, but the city of light. And I thought, and I didn't know that until last week. And so it was also quite comforting to sort of land on an impression that is, shared by some number of others. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the thing about impressions in cities is that the mechanic you use often in the book, which I think is really going to resonate with our audience, is the approach. The last 45 minutes of a flight into a city, or the departure, and especially the most evocative one for me, I think for many reasons, is Hong Kong.
Yeah.
When you describe the reveal, you're coming in from the east down the island, down the between the island and Kowloon to land, and you suddenly are just given this light show below you. It's something
sometimes
that I
literally, depending on the time.
Yeah, if you nail it right, every day.
We should accelerate in the aircraft just to make sure we
to get
we're there for the light show.
Don't you say that Hong Kong was your first flight as an actual pilot?
As a
747?
Yeah.
Wow.
Which made it doubly or triply memorable.
Yeah, absolutely. But I was thinking about it when, doing that trip so many times as a airline brat in Hong Kong, having come from a city that was new to me, like going to Sri Lanka when I was 11 years old, or somewhere that I was like, okay, wow, that was intense and maybe broadly intimidating. Coming around the checkerboard into Kai Tak and being able to sink into my seat and relax, going, familiarity, home.
Yeah.
Where somebody else shooting the same approach or landing or getting into a taxi or stepping out of the airport for the first time there might be a spike of intimidation there. In the same place, same buildings, same city. We have vastly different experiences.
Because we carry ourselves when we read a city.
Yeah. I mean, I only went to the old airport in Hong Kong once as a passenger, and I was looking down at the city and thinking that I was in the most different place in Pittsfield I'd ever been to, which was quite different from
I mean, with the new airport, at least you have a sort of introduction. You go into a modern facility, like it could be anywhere else in the world. You get on the Airport Express and you're gradually exposed to this human hive. Yeah. Whereas at Kai Tak, you were just like, get out.
I have to say, one of the most, we usually take buses from the airport into the cities that we go to as crew. And the most unbelievable bus journey of all is the one from Hong Kong's airport out to the island. I mean, the last bit into the island, you're in that tunnel, but those first few miles where you're just going over those islands and the port facilities are just, and you kind
gigantic,
of and you look and you see. I think Hong Kong is the only place in the world where they offload ships in the harbor because there isn't enough. I mean, they do both, dockside loading and unloading, but they also do it in the harbor because, and just to see the scale of those port facilities, which would astonish, I think, many people who weren't familiar with the scale of the economies of East Asia, and then to come to this forest of skyscrapers, which, again, you talk about New York. I love the New York skyline, but by any sort of objective measure, Hong Kong's is a more impressive one in terms of the height of buildings and the number of buildings that exceed certain heights.
Yeah, you referenced that in the book. I thought that was a fascinating statistic that one measure of sky linearity. I like that.
It doesn't quite roll off the tongue, does it? But I think it's a good concept. It just needs perhaps a better word than I could come up with.
That's perfect.
I would say that landing or departing, especially departing in Dubai nowadays, since the Burj Khalifa was built.
It's amazing departing.
And you are departing and the Burj Khalifa is still taller than you. And you're like, how is that even possible? And I see it. Are we not too close for comfort to fly there? It's absolutely impressive.
I just finished a book called Super Tall, which is about skyscrapers, which is really, right up our alleys, given what we've just been talking about. But it talks about how skyscrapers have kind of changed how we live and how cities work and how important they'll be to the future. And there's a whole section on the Burj, of course, because it's
mind-boggling.
It's mind-boggling, and they a whole other chapter on Singapore and its green skyscrapers, and it's a great book. But
Yeah, I've stayed in one actually. There's one hotel, I forget, Park Hotel, is that the name? When everything, they have lush greeneries everywhere in Singapore. So there is one of the, I think one of the first attempts to do these kind of neo skyscrapers that are more sustainable.
Well, there's one where
The downside is it's very humid because it's a lot of lush greenery.
Of course.
well, there's one where they have the trees growing sideways, and they have to turn the pots so they don't keep growing sideways and don't start growing up. Which seems kind of sad for the trees. But.
Yeah, I wanted to say something and I forgot. You just remind me of something, but well, never mind. So, New York, you've lived. How long have you lived in?
We were there for 8 or 9 years. Like that.
So, how long did it take you? Because Alex just mentioned having this feeling of landing and like I'm home, and for someone like me, at least having moved around. Some places I felt very quickly at home. So for me, for instance, Tokyo, as soon as I was landing, and back then was Narita, which arguably is not even in Tokyo so far. But I mean, for me, I was home. I had the same feeling in Manila. It took probably a bit longer. London took me almost 5 years. Every time I was landing, I was like, I still cannot understand that I live here, or kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Now it's clear. Now, I land and I'm like, everything, even the most nicest approach when you go over the O2 and you take the turn to be in line with Heathrow. It took me 5 years. For you, did New York feel, because you're also a pilot, when you were landing there, did you feel home right away, or it took a little?
It's funny. I mean, New York has, there are countries in the world where the main city has just this incredibly dominant role in the city. So like Brussels in Belgium, where my father was from, or you could look at maybe Copenhagen in Denmark, or places, or Tokyo in Japan certainly, where the main city has such an important role that if you grow up in that country. You're going to have this kind of constant drip of experiences of it, because you're going to be aware that your media the newscasters there, and the train lines go there, and the roads go there. I mean, it's not quite all roads lead to, but in some countries it's close to them.
London is arguably,
and I have friends or my husband Mark, like he grew up in Southampton and was always, London was just this kind of constant presence of this place that you were kind of always going to, and kind of, you went shopping there, I mean, and I had a little bit, New York doesn't dominate the US obviously to the same degree, but it does dominate that part of the US. Sure. And, when I was growing up, if we wanted like a new camera or a television, we would go to New York because it was cheaper that, and so New York had this kind of, and then like so many school trips we went on, we're to New York, there's these photos of me, there's lots of photos of me like atop the Trade Center in New York, or we went to the stock exchange because that was something.
Yeah, I did that as well.
Stand in front of the board.
Or the museums obviously. So New York it was the city.
It's very America, isn't it? I mean, there's not many where you just think, well, I suppose London is the same, but New York in the minds of everybody that is not American is America.
Yeah.
Or Manhattan.
Yeah.
You forget the rest of New York. That is the iconoclastic representation of America.
And so many of the friends I grew up with, not too many of them are there now in New York, but a lot of them were there for a couple of years. They went there either for college or for their first job, or they started their first job in Boston, but then got promoted to New York, which, says it all in some ways. And then
it's transient. I mean, it's like London.
Yeah, and then people moved out.
Yeah.
But so New York kind of always, I don't know, it always felt a little bit like a place where I didn't have to feel like a stranger when I got out of the station or out of the airport, and I think many people who live around London feel that way. They come to London and it's not a big deal. It's just the city. They don't. There's no reason to feel like you're in a place that's strange to you in some ways, because it's been such a constant. It's like a sun in some ways, or whatever the right metaphor is. Boston's a more curious place for me, because I did live there after I first lived in the UK. When I went back to the US, Boston is where I lived. And Boston, again, had that kind of childhood residents, and in some ways less than New York because it's a smaller city, but in some ways more because it was closer and we went there maybe more often. And then I did live in Boston, and it's also where my parents met. So my parents met in Boston. They first lived there. Many of their kind of, your parents tell you stories about, oh, when we lived here, or, oh, when we first met your godmother, or, all those stories were centered in Boston. And then I actually lived in Boston when I was at that management consultancy job. And so Boston is even more tied to kind of family and to how my dad arrived in the country. And I would say that the most kind of resonant flight personally, I mean, Hong Kong was amazing, but the most resonant first flight for me was when I first flew a plane to Boston. I was, coming in and I could, see the office I'd worked at a few years before. And I knew that my parents had, and there were all these weird coincidences. Like my parents had both found apartments in Boston that were very close to each other before they knew where the other lived. And then when I first got an apartment there, it was like a block from where my dad. I mean, it's weird, right? It's like I had I have their neurons, and I just looked and thought, this is a nice street. And 40 years later, I rented an apartment there, or whatever, 30 years later. So Boston has a nice and sometimes eerie kind of a sense of the past and the present. Do you know Boston? Do you have Boston experiences that you?
I'm sure Alex knows it very well.
Yeah, we have family out there.
Yeah. I've only been twice, and the last time was like 25 years ago. So I wouldn't say I know it well. It felt, and I know, sorry guys from Boston, it always felt, again, from someone not going to the US that much when I was young. I mean, I lived there, but it's a long story. But it felt like I want to go to New York. You know what I mean? It's like, it was this thing that it was, yeah, why not? But New York. And when I had to make a choice of a holiday, it would be like, let's stop in Manhattan, like Alex said. Brooklyn wasn't even a thing back then, right? You would not even consider, right? You got lost if you ended up in Queens, something like, because I was a pure tourist. And Boston wasn't on the map. Sorry, I'm sure some of our listeners will hate me now for saying this.
On behalf of the Red Sox hat that I was wearing yesterday, I will stand up for Boston. But I do,
I regret it, however, because
there was this moment. I think I read about this in the book. There's a sign in downtown Boston.
Yeah, you say
to get onto the Massachusetts Turnpike, and the sign is in the middle of Boston, and it says New York this way. Yeah. And it's such a strange sign to me, and it really does.
Welcome, now leave. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's just. I mean, New York isn't even on that road. I mean,
what?
That road doesn't.
I didn't realize.
I mean. It is the first road you might take to get to New York, but you'd have to take several others. And from that position in Boston, I mean, you could signpost Los Angeles, Chicago. Chicago actually is on that road. Seattle's on that road, and so that sense of New York's gravity continuing out even into the innermost sanctums of Boston is something I kind of. Find interesting and definitely wanted to write about in the book.
It's like those people that do not really count Yokohama because there's not even like a limit. If you've ever been to Yokohama, it's kind of continuation of Tokyo. There's not at some point rice fields in another city.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like the same city, and so most people, unless you live there, they just consider it almost the same city.
Yeah,
no, it's not. It must be really kind of. You must feel like the little brother that's being not talked about. Like, come on, I'm here and I'm big.
It's quite a big city. And sometimes when you even see lists of, I think it's always really interesting how you define a city. Like if you do population-wise, if you just do the city limits, well, that's obviously not a very useful measure. But then if you start expanding it out into metro area, or commuting distance, or there are these vague concepts of sort of economic interdependence. And, that's a whole other interesting question. But when you see those lists, actually, Yokohama sometimes paired with Tokyo. So you'll see Tokyo-Yokohama.
Yeah, because it is.
Yeah.
Let's say at least a good 30% of my friends live in actually Yokohama and commute every day to work in Tokyo.
Right.
But they don't even, I mean, they say they're in Yokohama, but they see it as the same part of it. It's like an organism, right?
Yeah.
There's no differentiation.
Yeah.
All the trains, this is why these lists, like you said, about the biggest city is always kind of very, like even in Europe, people say, oh, is Paris bigger than London or the opposite? And like, where do you put the limit in London? Where do you put the limit in Paris?
Yeah.
So Paris is more dense in the center. So obviously probably there's a little bit more people and people actually do live in the center. Whereas in London, you have to go a little bit more outside. So it's very complicated. And then it creates all that, sense of pride and chauvinism about my city is bigger, as if it matters at all. Oops. Is it me? So, we have an alarm. Yeah, as you can see, guys, we're doing that live. There's an alarm in the building somewhere. So let's see if we'll get clear if we need to escape this building on fire. No, it stopped. I hope, by the way, that the sound is good. We're using a room in central London. And I can hear the sound. It seems to be okay. Slightly echoey because we're in a small room with big windows, which is very nice. So I hope it's going to be good. There's no echo of Paul this time, unlike last time. A lot of people commented on that.
There was a period.
Again, it's fine. No, let's ignore it. There
was a period in like 2018 where I was traveling so much. It was. And everything became a blur. And I'm like, am I going to Tallinn or Vienna today? And I would have to go through this process in my head to make sure that I didn't underappreciate that I was doing this, of picturing where I was on the globe, forcing myself. And the opening of your book with the spinning.
Is it possible we actually do have to leave, or?
Not together. Let's see at some point.
When all the people start running by the window, we know to leave right on cue.
Run, it's like cry wolf. We ignore it. Maybe the building is actually
on behalf
on fire.
of a safety-related profession. May I suggest we heed the alarm.
I agree with you. Sorry, I have the same because 2018-19. That's where we're both really traveling a lot. At some point, you're right. You become almost like, if you don't explicitly think about it, it feels like a blur because you're going to one city and you're like, why am I doing? It's like you don't appreciate it anymore.
And I did that, and it made me appreciate, just how I got there and where I was and all of that stuff. And then obviously I didn't do it for 2 years because of COVID. And then as I talked about in previous episodes, my wife and I were just in the Maldives, and I did it there, and I was like, not in Kansas anymore. I am in the middle of friggin' nowhere. And there was just like this twinge of isolation and, just like, I haven't felt this in a while. And then I went and jumped in the ocean and I was fine. But it's quite a powerful exercise. I would imagine for you, it must be quite weird to go, where am I again?
Yeah. I mean, I was, when you were talking about Athens earlier, there's this other kind of category of cities in some ways, which are the cities that I go to, but I've never actually been into the city because we just fly there and turn around. And I think the best or the most sort of evocative example of that is Athens. And so when I used to fly the Airbus on short-haul routes within Europe, I would go to Athens quite often, but it was always a there and back, so we call it, in a slightly Tolkien-esque phrase, we would like fly from London to Athens, be on the ground for an hour, and then fly back to London. And so, to think about cities and to have seen Athens. I mean, I know what it looks like. I know the color of the buildings and the weather, and yet I've never walked through it. It's this weird thing.
There must be quite a short list, though. Are there many places where you didn't have the opportunity?
Yeah, a few others. Sofia in Bulgaria.
I was supposed to be there today, actually.
Right.
Thank God I'm here, actually. Yeah. Sorry, Stefan. With these two guys.
A few others. Tripoli, Moscow.
Moscow is amazing.
Zagreb.
Oh.
Yeah, but most cities we would, if not every time, then sometimes we would stay overnight and have those kind of longer experiences.
It was totally, Ryan, you'll be lucky because I wasn't talking about this. He's one of our listeners, and he sent me that exact question. So you kind of gave your answer. I want to hear Alex's answer. Do you consider a layover in a certain country having been to that country? For example, going YYZ, ICN, BKK, so Bangkok, without actually entering ICN. Can you say you've been to Korea? My fiance and I bring up this debate quite often. Ryan Banks on Instagram. So have you actually been to the country, or to at least the country? He asks not about the city. Have you been to the country if you just set foot in the airport?
You mean if you have like a bucket list,
layover.
or if you're checking countries off the
I
list?
know what you're.
Gosh, I mean, I would say yes, because that would help my numbers. that would be a big boost for my numbers, but I can see both sides of it. Certainly airports are.
They're almost like a city itself, right?
They are, and they are in some ways these kind of internationalized places, but in other ways they're more. You do get a sense of the place. I start with the book. I start Imagine a City with the description of being in Abu Dhabi, and I'm kind of when I write that, I'm in Abu Dhabi and I'm in the city. I'm in a hotel and looking out at the city. But I reference in my first trip there when I was on my way to East Africa in grad school, and I spent 2 hours in Abu Dhabi before changing planes. I think the plane then stopped in Muscat and then went on to Nairobi, which if you're a 22-year-old plane geek is, how else would you want to spend 24 hours?
The alarm again. Yeah, let's go until they throw us out. No, go. Let's go. Continue. Sorry for that, guys. If you read a piece of news that 3 AF geeks have burned to death in central London, you'll know that was us. I'll try to put that out before we do, so that will be our legacy. Sorry, Mark.
So I was there for 2 hours, but I remember the airport really well from that visit. And
when was that, if I may ask?
That was 98.
Oh yes. Wow. So
98.
The new tower wasn't there. For me, Abu Dhabi is that tower makes the entire airport. Feels like almost like a veil, like a sail and it's super remote.
Right.
I think when you taxi, you see it. Especially with that kind of haze that the sand gives. It feels like it's like by itself in the middle of the desert, and this tower. And for me, that gives you. That's what I love that airport just for that.
Yeah. So I do think airports can spark longer term interests in places. It certainly has for me.
Do you? We didn't prepare this, so maybe it doesn't have an answer. Do you think, because some airports we know the big airports of this world, some we know that we love, some we know that we don't love. Hello, Frankfurt. That's me. Mark didn't say that. However, do you feel? Is there like an airport, maybe several, that you feel are a very good match with the city they represent? Because sometimes some airports are very either neutral, so they're like this sameness. You feel it could be anywhere. Some are very, obviously the smaller one, it's easier, right? Like if you're in a small airport on like St. Lucia went like last month, obviously it feels like the place they represent. But is there like one airport that maybe is in your mind about something that you enter the airport, you're like, oh, I know it, and once you visit a city, that airport matches the city, maybe in its color, maybe in its ambiance, or... Yeah,
that's a really good question. My first reaction to your question was to think of the places where you get off the plane on steps.
Yeah.
And you kind of walk down the steps, and you feel the air. You feel that sort of conditioned air, and you feel the wind or the rain or something. But of course, most of those places that I've been to are very warm places.
Yeah.
And so it's a real.
Well, I've done the stairs in the middle of the snowstorm in Helsinki, so that works.
Oh, as well. Wow. So I think that's perhaps too easy an answer to your question, though, because that sense of having seeing
feeling the place already.
Feeling the place and having a sort of sight line to the terrain or the water around it or whatever is maybe too simple an answer. In terms of the new terminal in LA, the international terminal LAX, Tom Bradley International, yeah. That has of course I have to say Okay, I should have started with Honolulu because it's open air.
I was thinking of the Hawaiian places too, where there's no barrier between where the city ends and where the airport begins, and the promise is made as soon as you step off the airplane and through. And
there's no walls.
There's no walls. Yeah. That's
so
exactly where mine went too.
A good friend of mine, in fact, the friend Kiran Kapoor, the woman I write about in the chapter about Delhi, she grew up mostly in Hawaii, and her husband is also a good friend, and so they got married in Hawaii, and I went to their wedding. That was the only time I've been to Hawaii, and I was blown away by that experience. And then, actually, I was living in Boston then, and I had to come back to go to work, so I could only stay in Honolulu for 3 or 4 days, and then I flew back to Boston. And it was overnight. I guess I flew to LA and then overnight to Boston, and I had to go straight to work. And my office was on the waterfront. Mm-hmm. And that was the first time I took a water taxi from Logan to the office. And Logan is another airport where you see water. So you see water all around you. So it's very clear you're in a port city. Yeah. And so that does evoke Boston. But then, and it especially evokes Boston if you then go to the water taxi. And, I thought the water taxi, this is like 20 years ago, or more now, but I thought I'd never taken it. I thought, oh, there's a water taxi. It's going to be like it's going to be like this really like swish, like service that's like really regular. And it was like, the guy in the sailor in The Simpsons with like the yellow raincoat. It was like, that was like the guy. And I go up and I'm like, can I have a water taxi to, I can't remember the name of the wharf. And it was like a rowboat. It wasn't a rowboat. It was like a very small boat with, in a very unofficial format. And then we kind of motored across Boston Harbor. I think I still had my lei on, from the wedding. And then he like pulled up in front of the wharf, and I had to like jump up this dock like several feet to walk into my office. So that's if you arrive in Boston like that, there's no question about where you are.
Alex, is there one that you find?
Well, the Hawaiian ones were in my head. I think Male as well. Yeah. For Male, not the Maldives. Like Male Airport as it is now feels like the rest of Male.
Yeah.
Open air, warm.
Yeah.
The desk fan that's been removed from its stand and bolted to the wall. It's very Male. But the Hawaiian ones is where
I would say that actually Hong Kong looks like, I don't know why.
I think San Francisco as well, now that I think about it.
I don't know, because like for instance, Japanese airports are not very, they do not stand out, right? Even Haneda, to me, I feel home when I go there, but it doesn't represent the city more than this, to be honest. I'm talking on the way in, right? Not on the way out when you have this kind of fake Edo village and it makes like Japan. Hong Kong for me, because I came very late to Hong Kong, right? So my first time was in the 2000s. Late 90s. And the airport, the new one, I don't know why. For me, it feels like the city already.
I wonder if the answer to your question, or the best answers might involve food, actually.
No, of course. But when you arrive, that's what I'm saying. When you leave, obviously, you've been to the city and you have time. When you arrive, it's more like, because it's the first thing you see from a new country, right?
Yeah.
Some airports are like, the first time I arrived in Manila, it was the old T1. It still exists, but it's been refurbished. Oh my God. It's one of these cities, I moved to Manila without having any idea of how it looks. There's some cities in the world, we talked about, obviously New York, but even Hong Kong, and there's these mega cities, obviously, but also smaller ones that you have kind of an idea of how it should look. At least in your head, you made a construct. Manila had no idea. The only thing I knew about Manila was World War II movies from Hollywood, but I've actually never been. And you arrive at the airport, thank God it's better now. And it was raining inside, and everything was like falling down. I was like, what's going on here? And meaning that it's really the first impression I will always have had from the Philippines. I fell in love with the country, and there's nothing to do with the airport, but as a tourist, it's really literally your introduction to the country.
Vancouver is a good one.
Uh-huh.
But when you arrive there, they've got, there's a lot of wood. There's like a big water feature, like a waterfall, and you can smell I don't know actually if you're smelling the chlorine or if you're smelling some fresh water smell, but you can smell that waterfall in the immigration hall from hundreds of meters away. And so, and it's not crowded. It's efficient. It's a good. It feels like Canada.
Arlanda or Copenhagen could also be there. Copenhagen, especially, I think. Arlanda is maybe a little bit less.
But I think that's the problem now with modern airports, right?
Yeah,
they're all commodity.
Oslo,
yeah,
is
you're right.
a beautiful airport, and its woodiness
exactly.
is really distinctive. I mean, if you think of sort of modern Scandinavian design and how you make an airport,
right?
you'd end up with Oslo, which is
Zurich Gates E. I think it's very Zurich. Again, you mentioned the book. It's very Swiss. The cliche we have. I can say that because I'm a Swiss. Like everything is neat and square, and Gates E which is the international gates. It's neat and square. For me, it feels like the country. So yeah.
Is that the one where you have the train that has the video playing on the walls as you're moving, which they're assembling from images along the tunnel?
Correct.
Yeah. Is it a woman eating a piece of chocolate? Did I make that up?
I think
isn't she having like a?
I think so. I think so.
That was probably 15 years ago. I don't know.
No, I think so. It's hard to make. It's one of these things. It looks good on paper. We'll have something that if you look at the wall of the train moving, you'll be able to make something. And it's they do that in tunnels for cars as well. And you look at I see red and concrete, and you don't know what it is. So I think it was a good idea. But
for the record, Ryan, my brothers and my dad and I have very strict rules on this because we're always comparing our little competitive league tables on how many cities we've all been to. Unless you have stepped outside, breathed in the air, taken some food, and slept there.
Okay.
No.
What if you sleep at an airport hotel?
I was about to say you have a huge because you could.
I think it's
Narita. You've visited Narita many times then.
Yeah.
I think it's the time. It's that you have to have stayed overnight
in an
for
airport.
it to count.
Can it be an airport hotel?
It can be an airport hotel.
Can it be airside?
Yeah.
I think we can go back and add some detail to these rules
because
here.
Doha, they have these airside hotel when you do. I'm going to do it on Sunday.
No, I think it's more the process of going out and experiencing the city.
I've done Doha for the record, but yeah.
So there's a when I was writing Imagine a City, I wanted to get a sense of how many cities I'd been to, and out of and I landed on this UN list that was the cities in the world that had more than 1 million people.
Okay.
And they defined it. They kind of let the city define it, whether it was just the political boundaries of the city or a larger area, like a metropolitan area. So that means there's an inherent difference in how cities are calculated. But there were 548 of those. And I went through the list and I thought, as a pilot, I'll have been to most of them. I'd been to about a quarter.
Really?
Yeah. And of that 548, 120 were in China.
I was about to say, probably, right?
And
we've never heard of half of those names.
Yeah, almost all of those names were new to me. And, I think, I've been to so many cities. I've been to 4 Chinese cities. And then I think maybe 60, I can't remember exactly, 60 of them were in India, and I've been to 5 or 6.
Yeah.
And I mean, those statistics blew me away because, they reminded me that even a pilot isn't really going to go to, 1 million is a good cutoff for a big city, I think.
Yeah.
I think if you go to a city that has 1 million people, that's going to really feel like a city.
Yes.
So A, I was blown away. There's 550 of them. B, I was blown away that as a pilot, I've only been to a long haul pilot. I've been to about a quarter of them. And I was finally blown away to realize, or be reminded at least, of the predominantly non-Western character of our urban world. That, it's not, the idea that most people who live in cities are not living in the West is something that I think it's easy to forget when you live in a big city in the West.
Yeah, it's downtown. I call it downtown Asia because if you look at the number of people in Asia, and then you look at how many of them actually in cities, it's just staggering compared to. We're very quaint here, even London. It's. I love it, but sometimes there's also this sense of. some Europeans will look down on some cities. This is why a lot of people look down on cities like Abu Dhabi or Dubai, because they're like, oh, they're too new. So they cannot be cities because we've been here for 1,000. And you're like, what? I'm the same. I think it's completely wrong.
The provenance of the city is more important. I mean, Dubai is a fascinating story.
Exactly.
Fascinating story.
But I mean, there's this kind of, and Europeans are very guilty of that because they will look down on cities in the US as well. They'll say, New York, yes, Boston, yes, but then you go westwards, and these are not.
I think it's interesting to think of also how many cities throughout history have been planned from the beginning.
It's exactly where I was going. I wanted to go, because you mentioned Brasilia, which have you been, Alex?
No, I've never been.
Obviously for Av geeks, and for people who love cities, there's like something very special about Brasilia, because it was actually designed like a plane with a government on top. I'm not exactly remembering exactly. It doesn't actually look like that nowadays, obviously, but there's a.
I mean, the general outline is still.
It's a plane.
It's a bird or a cross. Or a plane, depending on your allegiances. But it's. I mean, if you're an Av geek, it's it's an amazing place to see from above, and then to go. I mean, it was, and the ways in which those architects were thinking of aviation as part of this kind of glorious future that a city, a new capital, could move an entire country or even a continent towards is really special. And the idea that cities are, cities do grow organically, and some of the ones people love best are these kind of old organic, almost boutique cities. But the idea that a new city would be founded and built along a plan, and would represent a whole set of things, a whole set of concepts, political and literary and military even. That's something that. That's a whole other aspect of cities, which I talk about mainly through Brasilia, which was so important to my dad when he lived there. But when he lived in Brazil,
it was Oscar Niemeyer who did. I think I'm pretty sure that Oscar Niemeyer called the top of where all the government buildings are the cockpit. I'm pretty sure.
Really?
I'm not.
I wish that.
But I've never been. Actually, there's a movie, if you guys are interested, it's a French movie with Jean-Paul Belmondo. It's called L'Homme de Rio. So the men are in Rio, the men off Rio. And they had the authorization of filming in Brasilia before it was opened.
Oh my God!
So you see, just for that, we probably can look it up on YouTube, and you see some of these cities completely, some of the parts of the city.
I bet my dad saw that film.
Am I in the presence of two lefties? I mean, statistically, that's pretty weird. Right?
Yeah, it is actually.
Yeah, it's left-handed people are way overrepresented among pilots.
Is that
really
true?
Yeah. I'm waiting. Someone needs to do a study on it. I don't know why it is, but it's
I think it's CEOs and U.S. presidents as well.
When I did the army in Switzerland, it's conscription in Switzerland for men. I did tests to. I was like, obviously, I was 18. I'm like, I'm going to be a jet fighter pilot, obviously, right? So I did the whole test to get into. I was too tall, so there's no way I could have fit. So I was like, but I remember having done the first two tests, and we used to have 20/20 vision, whatever. And they actually said that they had a lot of lefties. I remember.
Yeah.
And then they said, I don't know why, but yeah.
Maybe I'll think differently.
Yeah. So how is the approach to the airport of Brasilia? Is it something?
So I flew there as a passenger, actually.
Okay.
So I flew there I was on a very long trip to Sao Paulo. I think I had 6 days in Sao Paulo, and my dad had lived in Brazil in the 1960s. He had lived in a whole series of cities along the coast, but he was very into cities as well and airplanes. It's no surprise how I ended up writing a book called Imagine a City or Skyfaring. And he'd been there during its construction, so he had taken these photos of these buildings that were just kind of ribs, of these eventual kind of grand political structures and the cathedral and all that. And so I was really keen to see it. Of course, for anyone who's thought about cities in a kind of imaginative way, or about what they mean, or why we build them, or what we would want in them, the idea of a city which is constructed from scratch is just, it's catnip, right? It's just,
Absolutely,
so so I flew there, and when you land there, I mean, it's a savanna, and you can see there was a lot of construction going on the roads, before we got to the airport, and you could see where the road was cut, where the earth was cut, just the color of the soil, this really, really bright color, and I talk in Imagine a City a little bit about how unsettled how unpeopled that part of Brazil was when it was constructed, and how low the population density was, and the idea that you would, we think it's so easy to think of Brazil as a coastal, as it is maybe of the U.S., to think of them as these essentially coastal countries. And in America we have this, there's this sense of the heartland, and the idea that the middle of the country is in some ways the middle of the imagination in some way. I mean, that's quite a common way of thinking about the U.S. But that came about as a result of settlement and the frontier moving across until it reached the other coast. And for me, the idea that Brazil would have in some way an analogous trajectory, where you'd have Rio and this Salvador, which I think is the first capital, and then Rio, and Salvador is a very old city. It's a lot of those Brazilian cities are many centuries, they're 400 or 500 years old. And then the idea that in the 1960s, when people are getting cars and air travel is taking off, that you would think like we have to, we need a new capital and we need to put it in the middle.
In the middle, yeah.
I mean, it's just a very heady, obviously it didn't work out as they planned in a lot of ways. I think many more people live outside of the planned part of the city than ever lived in the sort of the planned original.
Yeah. That's why you don't see that shape. Even if you go Google Earth, you cannot make out that shape, that original shape.
Yeah.
Because it's organic. At some point, you live.
Yeah, which itself is something amazing about cities. The organic part, no matter what you plan, eventually the organic part takes over, which is what we see happening everywhere, I suppose, and probably for the good. But the idea that Brasilia was just this. I mean, it's like Washington. I mean, it's like if you imagine they built Washington in St. Louis instead of on the coast or something. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of scale, I think, of what it must have seemed like. And Wellington as well. I didn't realize that.
I'm pretty sure Wellington is also a planned city. I mean, at least parts of it. But even a city like Paris, it's not a planned city, obviously. But the reason that so many people love these big boulevards is because they've been basically Haussmann, the architect, came and basically redid the entire center of the city. I'm exaggerating a bit, but this is what at some point there was a plan. Yeah. Right. And so coming back to what we just discussed, having this kind of like almost, attitude like, my city is much older, thus it's nonsense, right? They have to start somewhere.
Yeah, but I mean, Paris is really, so I actually had a section in the book which I had to cut because this book was too long.
You don't mention Paris, I think.
But when I lived in Boston, there was in the 50s and 60s in Boston, they built this highway right through the middle of the city.
Oh yeah.
Called I-93, and there were big fights about it, and it destroyed some very, very historic neighborhoods of Boston. And then when I lived there in the 90s, they had undertaken this thing called the Big Dig, which was this plan to bury that highway. They might have planned it differently and just, increased public transport and taken out the road entirely. Like I think San Francisco took out its road after the earthquake. Is that right?
Yeah, next to the wharf now.
The one
that was elevated, the elevated one, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So Boston could have done that, but instead they decided to bury it. And I think the project didn't go very well. It was, it took decades, and I think it was many times over budget. And I heard it was the biggest construction project in the world for several years. Mm. And when I lived in Boston, I had to cross that project to get to work, to get to the waterfront, that had been severed by the construction of the original highway. And you looked at this highway and it was kind of decaying and the paint was peeling and you'd walk under it and like stuff would drip on you. And you're like, why did they ever do this? And then I saw a show about the Big Dig, and they talked about how, and it showed how that had been modeled when it was first built. And it was like some plan, like some presentation they were giving about when the highway was first built, how innovative it was going to be and how it was going to open up traffic. And you look at this thing and it shows, it had all these little lights moving along the freeway that they were going to build. It looked like the Jetsons. Mm-hmm. I mean, it looked like the future. And you kind of think, if I had seen that, I would have said, great.
Of course, yeah.
And then Houseman is a great example, because he, I think I stayed on Boulevard Haussmann when I used to be a consultant. We used to go to Paris, and we were right by Miromesnil, the metro station. And the character of Paris that a tourist might most easily attach to. If you're just a visitor or a business traveler like I was, and you look at these avenues, like, oh, it's Paris, it's beautiful. And you realize that those demolished a medieval city.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so it's really hard to know. We can't know how something's going to, how it's ultimately going to go.
Most of the time, there's these designs. Of course, they're utopias, but at the same time, they represent hope. You want to, like, when you look at what Cairo is doing with New Cairo, or Jakarta, they're building because it's sinking. So they build this. There's horrible traffic. They want to. Of course, there's hubris. Sometimes but there's a lot of hope when when you plan a new city. And successes
I think it's almost viewed as a panacea, right? This is going to solve everything. Yeah. We're just going to start again, everybody.
Yeah. Well, who doesn't? The idea of starting again is
it's appealing.
Is very appealing.
Very attractive.
Another city that was put in the center is obviously Astana, now called Nur Sultan, in Kazakhstan, right? And it's they also have spend a lot of money hiring all these great designers and architects who build all these massive buildings. Yeah. Some of them look stunning, but the first time I went there, now it's a bit better. There was literally no one. There's an old part of the city which has people, but the new part of the city, which now is comprises of most of the city, was empty. Yeah. And you have these huge avenues, and there's not a single car on them, and it is very bizarre. But it's. But at the same time, you need to at least I want to acknowledge that a city needs to start somewhere. It didn't have to start 1,000 years ago to matter. It can even start now, and maybe actually the city will matter. Actually, I like it. I like Nur Sultan a lot. The airport is pretty cool as well. The light, if you like, you mentioned several times light and air, because it's in the steppe, in the middle of nowhere. The quality of the light, you're on a movie set.
It's the weirdest
light ever.
Really?
A movie set is a great, like you post a picture and people are like, what filter is that? You're like,
no filter.
Mother Nature, my friend. I don't know what is happening, but it is so strange.
It is extremely, and it is eerie, but not in a negative sense. It's striking the first time. And that light, especially me as a photographer, I was like, what the hell is happening here? I needed to walk. You cannot really walk. It's so big, so you have the car, but it's absolutely fantastic. Since you mentioned Abu Dhabi, have you visited Masdar? They're kind of, they created that small city, which is a showcase of a city of the future. But now it's 20 years old. And you can see how it ages. They're like, you cannot drive in them, so you have pods that take you around the city.
Oh wow! No,
yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was going with. Wow. It's still nice, but you can feel that it's also all these planned cities are dated at the era they were thought. Like Brasilia. Yeah. The ideas of Le Corbusier and everything. Some of them are dated now. You realize that it's not how.
Well, you said you're going to Doha. Another section that I couldn't quite fit in the book was about libraries in cities, and the National Library in Doha is just stunning. It looks like an airport for books. I love that. I just got to send you guys a photo of it. But it's in a new part of the city. I can't remember the name.
The new part of the city.
Yeah. And when I went there, the taxi driver was just kind of going around one roundabout after another.
Didn't know where.
That didn't even have their plantings on them yet, and then and there's a bunch of universities there, I think, maybe offshoots of Western ones as well as local ones, and then you come to this library and you walk in and there's like families sitting on beanbags, reading to each other, and these tiered bookshelves, and then I walked out and walked around a little bit, and I saw a new metro station being constructed. And you kind of think, well, this will be a place. This part of the city will be, there are kids going. This is, I think about the library that I grew up going to, and it was called the Berkshire Athenaeum, and it's in Pittsfield. It's still there. It's a great little library, and I didn't even understand until I was like maybe in my 20s that it referenced Athens and a previous Athenaeum, and yet it was like my default library. And for those kids in Doha, they're going to have this default library. They'll go to, maybe one of them will one day go to I don't know, the Boston Public Library, and they'll be like, oh yeah, this is a library too. I had that library.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Have you guys played SimCity when you were young?
Yeah.
Me too, a lot. And I always started, because I make no sense, I always started with a metro system, because I always wanted to have like squares and metro. And a good part of the book, you mentioned obviously the Yamanote Line, which I realize you've done the entire clockwise. You've done it, is that correct?
The one in the book, I'm going clockwise.
Clockwise,
but it's hard to know which way to go.
It's. I was thinking about it this morning when my train was delayed and then it stopped before Waterloo. I mean, I'm just 3 stops away, but the train is just faster than the tube. And I was like, I miss that precision. It's always. I mean, I've seen delays, but it's always on time. So, what is? Because you mentioned part of the cities is arteries, part of the city is feeling, but I really like the infrastructure of a city, and I know that you've recently as well mentioned the new Elizabeth Line. So are you a lover of these?
I am. My geekery extends beyond aviation to
this is an engineering fascination. You guys were going off on Twitter about it, and I'm still not completely sold on this.
I do love. I love metro maps. I was often browsing them as a kid. I think the names on them are just the way that they suggest something, at least about the shape of a city and about its language, and is really special to me. And the Yamanote Line, which effectively forms a chapter in the book, or almost a chapter, is this above ground railway around Tokyo. And it's I can't remember the exact statistics, but I think at least before the pandemic, more people rode that than would ride the entire London Underground system every day. It's just unbelievable. The trains are almost. I mean. The joke is it's just one continuous train.
It almost feels. It honestly almost.
Like those old school elevators in department stores. You just jump on and.
But it actually feels like that, right?
It does feel like that.
It's nonstop. It's not like here where sometimes I'm like, shoot, I missed the train. Where is the next one? And like I'm in central London and I'm like waiting. Like it feels like Yamanote. This is why it's so reliant. This is why so many people use it, right? And also because it shows you all the important parts of Tokyo, right?
Its set of connections kind of define the rest of the network.
Yeah.
And
my station was actually Shinjuku, so
really?
that 3.5 million people.
That's the station, isn't it?
Yeah, this half. Basically, since Switzerland is 8, 9, depending, million people, so the half of Switzerland was commuting every day on that station. And when you arrive there, and you're like, for me, it was completely mind-boggling. But I know it by heart now. I cannot get lost anymore. Yeah. So sorry, Alex. We're losing Alex here. We were talking about metro systems.
No. I love it. I love it. I was just the Queen Elizabeth Line.
I love I love the idea of the infrastructure, how it looks.
Yeah.
I don't know I'm not an engineer in terms of, I don't know what will it solve to the city. I'm sure it will create a lot of opportunities, but I'm more the geek, like looking at, I want to see every single station and I want to see what they did with them more than the...
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's architecturally, and I think from a sort of giga engineering perspective, it was staggering what they did. And I love that every, 25 feet of digging, they would have to stop for 4 months because there was some architectural discovery, and then it was all fenced off with little viewports that we, the public, could go and see what they were up to.
A friend of mine's father used to work. She's Greek, and her father used to work in construction in Athens. And I think I guess it wasn't her father, but maybe a relative of theirs was involved in the construction of the Athens metro. And basically, you can't dig. You can't dig 30 centimeters in Athens without hitting some column from some.
Right, exactly.
But I was thinking about when you guys were talking about generation versus regeneration when it comes to the birth of a city. It's delicate, isn't it? There's a balance that needs to be struck, because there are schools of thought that just say a city by definition is ephemeral. It
needs to rejuvenate all the time.
All the time.
Shed its skin.
We will bulldoze medieval Paris with wanton disregard for what it may be regarded like in 200 years from now. And then there is the other side of the spectrum, which is we must preserve everything with, no
scare. Everything.
Nothing is, everything is sacred. Nothing can be changed. I don't really care if the traffic is building up to debilitating levels. But I think there's, the happy medium has to be struck. Otherwise, we do lose things. There's parts of the Bay Area that are unrecognizable now, even from when I was a snot-faced little kid. And I think for me, it's sad because now we're looking back with maybe it's nostalgia.
Yeah, I was about to say, that's very hard. The line is very hard.
It is hard.
Do you know what is just you? Because I think we all have also we started with that in the podcast, we all have this image of a place from where we knew it best. Yeah. And of course it changes. I said Geneva doesn't change, of course, but some other places change. And you like the Shinjuku, was it the west? Yeah. The west part, the east part of Shinjuku completely changed from where I was living to now. It's more modern. It's not bad, but so I'm having difficulty of exactly what Alex just said. I mean, is it because I wanted it to remain the way I knew it, and because it was kind of quirky? Because it was quirky. It was not practical, that part of the station. And now it's better, and you're like, did we lose something, or did I lose something?
Right.
Yeah.
But
it's
really hard,
which is
right?
a standard getting older thing about
it. Yeah, there's that element too. But it's one of the reasons why I think the book offers such an interesting perspective is that to see a city from the air can tell you so much about its geology almost as a city. And it's one of the many reasons why we all try and get a helicopter when we film attaché. So getting up and seeing, like Osaka, is an ancient-ish city, but large sections of it were, through man-made and natural disaster rebuilt. And it looks like scar tissue. The color is different. The texture is different.
How interesting.
Yeah. So you can see where and you look at it and go, something bad happened there.
Wow.
Many decades ago, but there's this schism physically that you can see. It's very striking to me. So I think that perspective, and you describe it so beautifully in the book, is really important, even if you never get at the ground level. In fact, I don't think you obviously wouldn't notice at ground level.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
But at 1 to 30,000 feet, you do see that geological makeup of a city. And I'm talking geological in modern terms, not in ancient terms. So
but even in the older terms, like, it's sometimes, when you come to like Boston from London, it's kind of, it's right on the coast. There's no mystery as to why there's a city there. I mean, the Pilgrims landed in Plymouth, and just across the bay is a city. Like, it's just that simple. And often, especially in North America, you see where two rivers form where two rivers meet and form a third, there's going to be a city, Pittsburgh, Calgary, it's just, there's this weird way in which cities are made by nature before they're made by us. I was thinking, for your Londoners in the audience, there's a play on now called Straight Line Crazy.
My wife just went and saw it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So it's about Robert Moses, who tried to make New York, or did remake New York in a sort of automotive-friendly way, which, in his battle with Jane Jacobs, who had this sort of more organic idea of cities, and who's actually from a place in Pennsylvania very close to where my mother was born, and that confrontation between them and how it affected New York and how actually it affected many other U.S. cities, because New York's highway construction, the idea of parkways, was adopted by many other cities, and I think and you see the kind of, I mean, he's a very controversial figure, but you see that he had some of the ideas were just kind of like, you can see why people agreed with him. Like, he really thought if you build these roads, people will just go out to the country. Yeah. They'll if it's easier to get out of the city, then people will get more fresh air and more trees. And, which people is another question. But, it didn't occur to him that people would just move to those places and start commuting. But, so Rafe Fiennes is in the play. It's great. Did your wife like it? Or?
Yeah, she said, ostensibly it's a play about urban planning, but it's far more interesting than that. It's a fascinating story.
I need to see this.
Yeah. It's good. They made a movie out of it. Alec Baldwin played Robert Moses.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting story as well. Coney Island was the carrot. to lure people out for the day, and then they just ended up creating the Bronx for, it's a very interesting tale about planning versus nature, really, or organic, as you said, more.
And the park, like the Taconic Parkway, which is a much older road than the ones Moses did, but it goes up from New York up towards. It doesn't go into Massachusetts, but it goes very close to where I grew up, and that was the main road that we would take to go to New York. It was the most direct one, and they built the New York Thruway later. I guess I don't know who built that, but and you drive down this road and you realize it was built for the idea that you would go for a drive because it was nice to go for a drive. Like they put in curves, and there's these old stone kind of picnic areas in the middle, and it is not a road for modern SUVs. I mean, and there's basically no breakdown lane. I actually broke down on it once, and it was extremely unpleasant experience. But that idea of that was another idea about how the city should relate to the areas around it. And growing up in one of those areas, it's kind of burned into my memory.
Related, I think where I'm judgmental, because Alex knows me, I'm judgmental. I try not to be on the podcast, but I vastly prefer cities that are walkable, obviously. And I will judge a city by the number of cars or traffic. So, you can give a pass to, I'm going to Karachi on Sunday. If you've been, it's just crazy, like all these cities, Cairo, Manila, whatever. But in our countries here in Europe or in the US, what did I say? Our countries, because the three of us are from here, probably. I will be judgmental about this. And for instance, one of the things that I didn't realize for a while in Tokyo, because Tokyo has some, but there are some highways in the middle of the expressway in the middle. You're like
often where rivers used to be.
Exactly. But one of the things that I really enjoy about Tokyo is that there is no on-street parking.
Yeah, you have to have an off-street space.
So you walk these little streets or even bigger ones. There's never a car parked.
And although you do see those parking garages.
Yeah, but it gives an entire. As someone who walks, it gives I find most of the cars eyesores. Right? I'm sorry, like car lovers, we hate me. I understand that some cars can be beautiful by themselves, right? But in the context of traffic, I'm like, so
You must love LA then.
Yeah, LA is very hard. I don't think I would be able to live there, man.
I'm working this week on a Financial Times article about the book a little bit, but mostly it's about a recent trip to Delhi. And Delhi is a city which has been, as far as I can tell over the years I've been going there, completely transformed by its metro system.
Yeah.
And I have to say there is my adventurousness, or maybe it's a lack of adventurousness, but my willingness to go out somewhere in a city when I know that I can see this map and I know, okay, I go here and then I change and I go here, and when I get there, I'll be like 600 meters from the place I want to go. Like that, the way that the metro map, aside from not sitting in traffic, the way in which it
makes the city readable.
It makes the city readable. Exactly. That's the best way to say it. Yeah. Is for a foreigner obviously they have enormous benefits to the people who live there, but as a foreigner, it's just transformative. And, a city like Delhi, I think they're saying in 2030, it's going to overtake Tokyo as the world's largest city. It is, if you have not been to Delhi before and you walk out of your hotel, like it's
overwhelming.
It can be overwhelming if you haven't been to that. If you come from a place like Pittsfield, for example, and you end up in a place like Delhi, you're gonna need a way to make sense of it, and the way that a metro map helps with that. Do you guys know those books by Mark Vanhoenacker, Metro Maps of the World, and he did a few other. I love those books, and they're beautiful books, and they kind of evoke the sort of imaginative quality of those maps, and of course the London Underground map is iconic. But the way as I said, the role they have for people who live in those cities is a whole other conversation. But even as a visitor, the ability just to be able to move around on a metro is just amazing. And you see here in London, we have so many visitors from the United States, and you often see them on the looking up at a tube map, or they're on the train deciding where to get off, and thinking, or I just now I heard people saying, oh, should we get off at Waterloo, or and I remember what that was like to come to London and to feel the city kind of forming out of both that map and also the way in which you you have these like almost like mushrooming or flowering images that come out of that map from the places you've actually gotten out and walked
It's a
around.
lovely description.
A few years ago, I was on the Piccadilly line a lot, and I thought, if I was going to try to memorize this, how would I go about it? And I never did, but there were these whole areas where, like, basically the run from Heathrow into town, I could kind of do by thinking about what the next place was, just in the way you could talk about the rooms of your house just by kind of mentally walking through them.
Yeah.
And so I could do that for like maybe half the line. And then in the center of London, I could just say, well, of course that's the next station. Just like, well, of course the kitchen's the next room, And then, but as I got towards the northeast, like past King's Cross, then I thought, well, I think I've been to Holloway Road once, and I know the end of the line is Cockfosters, and I thought, well, I'm just going to have to come up with some acronyms or something.
Yeah.
Because I don't have that kind of visual, I don't have those visual pieces of that puzzle. But
Sorry, I spoke too early. Do you have these kind of same visual in your head as with your airline routes, the routes that you do the most? Do you have kind of visualization? Yeah. But you mentioned at some point in the book, and I've never done it, Alex has done it, is you said that there's basically two ways to go down Africa, and he feels like it's, for some point, there's nothing. Like there's not like these bright lights of cities. There's the absence of cities and these corridors you put through. So do you have like in your head, do you have like maps? Maybe cities themselves are a map to where you're going or you used to?
I mean, that's a really good question. It's not obviously it's not quite as neat as a metro map, but there are air routes which are much like metro maps, and they have their waypoints along them. And there is, as you said, when you go to Cape Town from Northwest Europe, there is sort of a set of routes that go that stay over the continent, and they go through places like the Congo, and then down through Angola and over Windhoek in Namibia, and you can go from London after, if you're going south from London, you pass Algiers, and then you're kind of over land for the rest of the trip. Maybe the last few miles you might go over the ocean in Cape Town, depending on which way you're landing, but you're kind of over land. And then there's another set which go where you leave the West African coast near Lagos or Accra or Lomé, and then you're really over the ocean for like 3 or 4 hours. And I mean, it is really the most, it is. And so when you're doing that, you do pass, let's say, Lagos, and you kind of look down and you see, it's obviously a very humid place, so that you don't get a clear view of the city, but you do pass these lights, and you can see the other settlements along the coast, and then it kind of just goes behind the windows and behind the wing, and that's a very striking sense of a city which is on the way to another city. And of course, on other nights we land in Lagos, but if you're going to Cape Town, you continue on, and then you come in the very last few miles of the flight, you'll come over land again as you come into the Cape Town area from the northwest, and it's a very visual set of experiences like that. And LA is another great example where you take off from London and you fly northwest over Scotland, maybe Iceland. Then you have those amazing views of Greenland, and then you're over like 4 hours of Canada, over the tundra, and then the forests, and then you're over the American Midwest, and then suddenly you're over Utah and the Rockies, and then it just gives way to desert, and then it's just it's the Great Basin of Nevada, and then the Mojave, and then you have this like ring of mountains on the horizon, and they're often snow covered, which is so amazing to people who've never been to LA before, that it's surrounded by snow-capped mountains sometimes. And then you kind of come down, and then if you're coming in the evening, LA is the most remarkable place to land at night. It's just unbelievable. This sheet of light which is being kind of held in between the ocean and the mountains, and so there is that visual sense. But of course, on other nights, it's cloudy. That should be a bit of a downer. But
I mean, I can relate to that from coming into San Francisco or anywhere in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Because of the day flights, the London to the Bay Area is invariably a day flight, and those flights are interminable. They just drag on and on and on. And it's the 4 hours over Canada that kill me, because there's not a lot going on. But then as soon as we get northern part of California, there's, for me, so many visual cues. And it's like, okay, well, we're going to do this approach, which means it's going to take a lot longer.
Oh, wow. That level of detail.
Or we're just going down, so we're going to turn left instead of turning right and all of that. So for me, and then a lot of different emotions tend to pop up as well. That sense of, promise. And you describe it beautifully with the Golden Gate Bridge as being this sort of natural and man-made welcoming to a city. But recently, in the last 2 years, a new pang of excitement as, I now was going to go see my now wife. Seeing the Golden Gate Bridge was, there was something visually, but there's all these visual cues in the last 2 hours.
That arrival is just extraordinary. And I often want to tell the passengers,
look out the window.
In about 20 minutes, you're going to have a great view of the Golden Gate. But of course, you don't always have a good view, because sometimes it's socked in fog.
Yeah.
And then you kind of feel like, well, I shouldn't have told them that, should I? So now I say, depending on the clouds. That's my current phrasing.
So you announce it even though... Do you say depending on the clouds, or sometimes you just shut up because you're like, it's so bad?
We're doing we do that 40-minute call.
We
can't yet see it, so we don't, and we know the clouds at the airport from the weather report. But as you know very well, the clouds at the airport may not be of any use to gauging the clouds over the bridge. Yeah. So I'll say, in 20 minutes or so, depending on the clouds.
Or you say to he doesn't do that. You say to the crew, keep those shading things on the windows. No, I can't see anything anyway.
But that's the great thing about San Jose as well, and I'm sure you've done this as well, is to leave San Jose to go back home, back here. You take off and then you do a full orbit of the airport. So you get this, and it's usually at dusk, or at least for me in the summer when I do it. So you get this full panoramic, slow tour of the Bay Area before you wave goodbye and start heading north. Wow. And the light is usually this bizarre kind of indigo, it's one of my favorite things. And it's just always bittersweet as well because I'm leaving, but through those big Dreamliner windows, it's just, my face is just pressed against it. Because
that REM song, Leaving New York?
Yeah.
I saw Never Easy. I saw the lights fading out. I often think of that song when leaving New York. Yeah.
We'll go to the Dreamliner actually in a second because we want to learn about it. But maybe one last thing about seeing from above it that comes from what Alex was saying when he was describing beautifully actually this fracture in Osaka. You mentioned, and of course that talks to me because I'm going next week, you mentioned that some cities have different hues of colors. And it's true, we all see that. Some are more orange, some are more bright. Maybe it's because they chose LEDs over the old lamps. But they say the passage that of course struck me is when we say Karachi is very orange and Lahore is way more brighter. I can't wait to actually see that because I'm going to be next week. So hopefully you can attest to that. Do you have a favorite hue? I know it's a bit silly question.
No,
because for me, honestly, the orange looks more romantic to me. When it's too bright, it's almost like this is like it seems like a factory. I don't know what. Yeah,
that's a great question. I have to start by saying, of course, blue is my favorite color, like any good out geek. And in the book, I do try to associate. I write about Cape Town and the important the buildings aren't blue, but pretty much everything else there suggests that color. And
you must like Greece, then. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I do. I haven't been to Athens in the city, but I have been to a few islands. And in terms of it's interesting about the colors of cities. I mean, when you fly over London, you can really see how the residential areas are more yellow, which is, I guess, the sodium lights.
Yes.
But then the city itself, like the city with capital C, is much whiter, and I don't know what that is. It's a different kind of street lighting, maybe.
Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a like.
And the red beacons, of course, which are concentrated in the areas with the tall.
It's also probably because you don't want the lighting to kind of disturb your sleep or like be in front of your house. So in the residential district, you probably turn it. You know, I have like a park in front of me, and there's this footpath, and the lights are very orange. And I guess it's not too. Otherwise, it would probably be disrupting.
Yeah, that's interesting.
In my house or something. I don't know.
I've often been struck when you fly over the American Midwest in winter when there's just snow everywhere, especially if it's like a full moon. Like when I was growing up in Pittsfield, I was often struck as a kid, but I was often like looking out my window and at night and in the winter, and you would look at the stars or whatever. And you know, you guys know this well. Like it's never dark in winter if it's snowy out. Like you can walk around. You can walk around as if it's daylight. If the moon is out, you can probably read a newspaper, just because the ground is white and it's reflecting all that. And when you fly over like Midwestern cities, the sense that it's almost like a different kind of daylight, like the moon is out and everything is white and reflecting it, and then you can see the city so clearly because it's kind of backlit by the snow everywhere. Is a really special effect. It must happen in. I suppose you have mountains in the way, but in Switzerland. But if you must occasionally get a very brief view of that effect.
Yeah, very brief. Yeah, that was just so small. You have to be paying attention. So because we have a few more minutes remaining, tell us about. So there's obviously two things that we're curious about. We discussed this before. One is obviously how did you survive through the pandemic not flying? But that comes second in our level of interest. The first is maybe last time we saw you were still flying a 747.
Yeah.
Are you flying a Dreamliner? So can you tell us about, of course, first, why maybe that decision? Because, I mean, we know that they were winding down, but they were still there. And maybe why the Dreamliner and how that went through?
Yeah, I really struggled with that decision to, we kind of bid in order of seniority to leave to do a new course on a new aircraft. And the 747, I don't need to tell you guys what that plane meant to me. It was the plane I dreamed of flying when I was a kid, and
it's still in your Twitter handle.
Yeah,
Good.
it is. I'm not changing that. And Mark V 747, 787.
Yeah.
Maybe I should register that too. I don't know, just hedge my bets.
Just to have it. Yeah.
And I'd been flying it for maybe 10 years, and I knew that eventually the 747s would be retired. No one knew how quickly, of course. I was going to these 747 routes, the 747 destinations. I was going there kind of, so often. And the 787 was flying to a different set of cities, some smaller, but some bigger. But, a lot of places I'd never been. I'd never been to Kuala Lumpur. I'd never been to Santiago. I'd never been to Chennai or Hyderabad.
So cities drove your decision to...
In part, yeah. Which, again, reflects that those passions are inseparable, really, cities and planes. So I wanted to change, I guess, as well. And each year we bid, and I kind of hemmed and hawed and eventually went for it. And, it is an amazing plane. It's much more efficient, obviously. I think it's about a third more efficient than the 747. A lot of people talk about the lower cabin altitude and feeling better in higher humidity and, feeling better after a flight. There are all these like little small details, like the bunks are actually outside, our crew bunks are actually outside the flight deck. So we have to walk out of the flight deck to reach them.
Where are they?
They're above first class.
Okay.
Or above club, depending on the configuration.
Oh, yeah, of course, because in the 747, they were within the flight deck.
Yeah, they were within the flight deck. So you could...
How do you access them?
There's a door.
If I'm in first class, I see you going there.
There's a door. There's a small door.
Okay.
Yeah. That was... it's a small thing, but like on the 747, if you were... you could go get changed and put your pajamas on before your break and then go to the toilet to brush your teeth. And of course, on the 787, the washroom is the same one the passengers use, and you're out of the flight deck. So you have to just plan your journey to sleep slightly more carefully. But then there are other advantages about that configuration. Like on the 747, we were upstairs, obviously on the overdeck, and you didn't see many passengers. You didn't even see that many of the crew because there'd be two crew members working upstairs, and the plane was so big that the first time I did that flight on the 747 to Hong Kong that first night, we went up before the passengers boarded, and then 40 minutes later, the ground team came up and said, "Okay, everybody's on board. 330 people." I hadn't seen a single one of them.
Wow.
And on the 787, it's we're on the same deck as the passengers and the crew, the rest of the crew, and so you see a customer going into the washroom and you can wave, and if they want to come look at the flight deck, and it's a smaller plane, so there's there's fewer crew on it, so in that way it feels friendlier maybe, or it's easier to have those interactions, which are kind of a nice thing. And then of course the pandemic was, one of the effects of that was the grounding of the 747s, and then the 787 started going back to.
By that time, you already had transition.
I was already on it. Yeah.
Oh, the Dreamliner, yeah.
Yeah, and then a lot of the routes that I thought I would never go to again, like San Francisco and Los Angeles, and which I thought were kind of iconic 747 routes. Then the 787 did start going to those. The joke the phrase that people say is never bid for destinations, because they change so quickly between aircraft types. So so having thought I would never go back to some of those places, London to LA, it seems like it's an A380 route, if not a jumbo route. But nevertheless, during the pandemic, the 787 did go there, and so I was going back to some of those places again.
But when I think about the transition from or away from the 747, the cities that the Dreamliner served initially, when you were thinking about making this change, obviously were a factor. But it seemed like a more natural progression would have been to the 777.
Yeah. I mean,
in terms of.
Why the Dreamliner?
Why the Dreamliner?
It could have been the 350 as well.
Could have been the 350,
because you used to do 320 before.
Or the 380.
Yeah.
But 380 we kind of already knew. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, that his lifespan was shorter because basically Airbus has decided to stop producing it.
I mean, and I think if you're on the 380, you just won't have as many destinations because there's fewer aircraft, and they're just going to go to sort of 3 or 4 cities at a time rather than 20 or 30.
Not as fun.
I mean, I think it was just that it was kind of newer. I'd been flying this kind of iconic, but older aircraft, which, wasn't really all that computerized. I mean, in some ways, the 747, it was quite, it was quite an authentic experience of flying.
It wasn't fly-by-wire, though.
No, it wasn't fly-by-wire, which a lot of people don't realize. And so I kind of thought, well, having done that, now let me go to the front of the queue and see what they've been doing in the last 20 years or 30 years. So it's a nice place to be, and I feel good after flights. Like I feel like the air pressure and the humidity do seem to have an effect. I think the 350 is pretty similar, actually. But.
You just used the word friendlier to describe your experience with the passengers. Is the Dreamliner a friendlier plane to fly as well?
Let's see. I mean, in some ways it is. I mean, the checklists are all electronic, so we have a paper checklist, but we almost never use it. So all the checklists they just come up on screen at the right time. Wow. And a lot of the checklist items are referring to the position of switches or the status of systems, which on a paper checklist you have to verify, but on an electronic one, the system itself senses that they're correct. So the checklist, a lot of the items on a checklist, not all of them by any means, but maybe a third or half, you don't even actually have to read those items because the aircraft has already sensed that they're complete.
Oh, wow.
That must have been kind of jarring, because I don't know about you, but the first time that I saw, or physically saw, as opposed to a picture, the flight deck of a Dreamliner, I was like,
it's a video game.
Where is everything?
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing here.
Yeah.
But if you, I mean, in this, like you say, the 747 is a previous generation, there were a lot more things that needed to be interacted with.
Analog.
Yeah. I mean, did you have to sort of sit there and go, oh, no, it's done it for me. Oh, it's done that for me too.
Yeah. I mean, there was a little bit of that, but each checklist does still have sort of manual items where you're kind of verifying that something's been done, and maybe maybe you have more bandwidth for those because the other ones have been sensed by the aircraft, I guess. And it has the screen, the size of the screen's just great. And it was really, with the 747-400, you really had the sense they'd like stuck some screens in. Whereas this was that wasn't quite the case, but it did have that. It could give you that impression that they just like cut out some squares in the front and put some screens in. Whereas the 787, I mean, it's like cars, you can see that on some cars, they've just put the screen in above the radio because that's where they put a screen. There are others now where they've said, okay, let's start from scratch. Like we're going to have a big screen, aren't we? And the 787 has those. It's a small thing, but it has these really good floor heaters. It's crazy how cold a flight deck gets. I mean, the air isn't cold, but the metal on the floor. Like when I flew the Airbus within Europe, the older ones, I would if I was doing like a 4-hour flight, I would wear like wool socks.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
I mean, I think they've probably put foot heaters on them now, but and on the 747, there were foot heaters, but they weren't as good as the 78 ones. And it's just weird. I think it just soaks in the cold from the outside. So even though the air is obviously room temperature, the floor of the flight deck can be quite cold.
That's interesting. Yeah. Considering it's a composite airplane,
Well, that's a good. Yeah, maybe that's another reason the 787 is warmer. Of course, yeah. But for one, whether it's the heaters or that, it's definitely a cozier place to.
And how was the actual the training? So did you have to stop flying the 747 completely, dedicate all your time to the retraining?
Exactly that.
And did you get also your trainer? Was he someone would prefer to be by the pool in Singapore? I think that's your
No, that was back in flight school. Yeah. No,
so how is it at BA? How was the process?
It was, so I had a final flight on the 747.
Where?
To Cape Town.
Oh. Did you choose that?
I did. Yeah, I went to a lot of trouble to get that. I figured I was just going to go out in style.
Nice.
Soak up a last bit of blue.
Fantastic.
And then we came back. I came back to London. I had maybe 3 weeks of ground school where you're just kind of looking at, you're doing all this computer-based training, but it's not a simulator, and it's just talking through all the systems, and you kind of they have like computerized training modules where you're just kind of clicking on a screen to explore the systems, that kind of thing. But it's not a simulator. Then there was an exam, and then we went into the simulator, and that was, I can't remember how many sessions, maybe 3 weeks of simulators. Wow. Maybe a little longer, exams along the way. And then the first flight, which was to Kuala Lumpur.
So
I did, yeah. Yeah.
Is that the time when you went to Malacca?
No, that was much later. Yeah. And then 4 or 5 trips like that, and then an exam, and then you're off. Yeah. So we have to get you guys in the simulator sometime.
Oh well.
We would, yes, grudgingly accept.
Reluctantly, I could drag you there.
Oh, and so you are. So when you retrain like this, are you becoming automatically the pilot flying the first?
So I'm still first officer. So becoming the command training is a separate process. So I could have started that on a short haul aircraft years ago, but if I'm going to stick to long haul, I've just got to wait for my number to come up.
Oh, so you have to wait.
Yeah. So hopefully in the next few years.
They tell you.
Well, you bid for it, and then if you bid, it's all seniority based, like everything. So that will hopefully happen in the next few years.
Nice. No, it's fascinating. I was wondering if there's anything in terms of, I appreciate more, you're handling physically flying the plane less and less as technology gets more and more advanced. But was there anything where you were flying the airplane where you thought, oh, that's different. That's got a lot more kick to it, or that feels different?
That's a good question. I mean, in some ways, the most dramatic thing was lowering the landing gear in the aircraft for the first time in the real aircraft, because on the 747 you're upstairs, right?
Yeah.
So the landing gears are a really long way away.
Oh, so you don't feel it as much?
You don't feel it. You barely hear it.
Trust me, when you're in the nose as a passenger, it's amazing.
Yeah.
The plane is crumbling under me.
Yeah, I mean that. So that's the feeling I had in the 787 because the wheels are like right beneath you.
Right.
I mean, they're just a few feet away. Whereas on the 747, you like lower the landing gear and you can feel it because they're producing drag. So you can, as you're flying, you can feel, you have a physical sensation
That the plane is a bit
that the plane
slowing
has
down
more
or
drag than it did a moment ago. But you could kind of hear it, but it was more like, you had an awareness that. And of course, the main wheels were so far away. But on the first time I put the wheels down on the 787, and the simulator simulates this, but not quite accurately, I guess, because the first time I did it, I had that exact session, like, oh my god, those wheels are quite close to us.
So, but do you get the same sensation of drag coming? And does the airplane immediately take?
No, I mean. No, you still feel that there's, and you hear it. You hear the air. I guess maybe almost that's maybe more what I mean is that you can hear the wind on the landing gear more clearly from the 787. Also, the flight deck on the 787 is so much quieter than the 747, and
so you tend to hear more things, or
you can, and the sometimes when two planes pass, and they're still safely 1,000 feet apart, like on the 747. You don't hear that plane because the cockpit is so noisy. But on a 787 on the flight deck, if you can hear other planes.
Really?
Yeah, and that is really.
Now that's something I've never experienced, being able to hear.
Yeah, and that is really, if you've been in the sort of a 747 for 10 years, that's a very striking sensation, and it speaks well of the 787, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So don't you miss that noise when you sleep? Because, some people kind of white noise. Of course, the 747 would do more white noise. So you would actually, maybe that would put you to sleep faster than the quietness of a Dreamliner.
Yeah, when you're on the 787, when you're in the bunk, there's still enough white noise. Well, weren't there stories when the A380 came out that like it was almost too quiet and you could hear cutlery?
I was just thinking about it's the forward section of the upper deck of a 380 is disconcertingly quiet in flight. Yeah. Especially actually during takeoff, because you're like, surely we should be going a little. Come on, it's very.
Maybe it's like electric cars make those.
Yeah,
the artificial
simulated noises. Yeah.
But I remember I was lucky by complete accident. I was flying back from Tokyo to London, but via Dubai. So I was using Emirates, and I think July 2012. Maybe I'm making this up, and it was. By pure chance, it was the first time they were flying a 380. So it was I arrived at the airport, super cool, because suddenly, you had officials, and I'm like, what's going on here? I was supposed to fly a 777. And to make the story short, I had a lot of interaction with the crew because it was basically half of the plane was Emirates staff because they had like a whole thing, like a party, whatever. So I was even bumped up because I was in first class for one of my first times because the entire business cabin was taken up by Emirates people. And that's when I learned, they were telling me, we had to be trained specifically to be very quiet at nighttime when we do all the catering things, putting out like water, because if you slap one of these doors, and you could wake up actually some passengers and people that used to fly 777s, you don't have that issue because it's not as quiet. So you would, you kind of hear that something is happening in a galley, but not in the 380. They were telling me, we had to learn to be very closing very quietly.
Have you guys had some 787 experiences you like? Well, you mentioned the Dreamliner from San Jose, and
I mean, it's
a beautiful plane.
It's a stunning plane. I mean, I remember the first time I ever saw one in flight. I was at Gatwick. And it was really, really early days. I would think TUI, Thompson, were still the only people flying them in the UK. And it was coming into land from the opposite side of the airport, and with those wings up so high. And I was just my kids are like, what's wrong with Dad? He's like pressed up against the window watching this bird of prey come in and strike. But also, I think for me, one of the things that was so wonderful about it is that for the longest time, years, you could look up in the night sky and know from 36,000 feet away on the ground, that's a Dreamliner.
Because of the beacon. Yeah. I've noticed those as well. The first time I saw a Dreamliner, I didn't see the plane, but I was flying back from Phoenix on a 747. And there was
you crossed it.
What's that?
You were in the air when you.
Yeah, we were in the air, and I saw a beacon from another aircraft, and we could hear it was a Boeing call sign. It was like a Boeing test aircraft.
Oh, wow.
And they were like Boeing 251 or something. And we looked at it, and we saw the beacon, which just to explain what we mean, it's instead of strobing, it kind of comes on and off.
Yeah,
Rather
there's
than
no-
a flash, it's
yeah.
like on off.
The filament isn't cooling down and giving that residual
Yeah.
up and down. It's just,
Yeah, and we saw that. We just saw the red light, 30 miles away, and I bet that's a Dreamliner, because I've never seen a light like that. So.
And now you fly one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so
The great wheel turns.
for passenger, it's obviously the big windows are something that is very strong. All my friends who are not into planes as much as we three here and our listeners are, they all mention the windows. Of course, as well the dimming that comes with this kind of gel, whatever, that gives this bizarre hue. Alex and I do not like that the crew can have and handle all that, because sometimes in the middle of the night I get it. Like if it's gonna if you want to create, you don't want the odd person to wake the entire plane. I get this, but at some point I'm like, I want to see what's outside. This is why I have a window seat,
especially on a North Atlantic night flight in the winter when the possibility of the Northern Lights is high. I want to be able to.
You want that freedom, yeah.
Virgin did let us. I just flew Dreamliners back and forth to St. Lucia, and they did let us control the whole time. On the return flight, it was a night flight, so of course it didn't really matter. But I mean, they never took control over the dimming, which was nice.
The first time I flew a Dreamliner as a passenger was to Newark, I think, and I went to, it was like a day flight, and I was in club and in one of those middle seats, and I'd never seen those windows in action before, and I went to sleep for a couple hours, and then when I woke up, I thought, what's going on? And I looked in the windows, and I thought it was the moon.
Yeah, because it's
Geeky fact, astronomer's fact is the moon and the sun have the same apparent size.
Okay.
Just the moon is much smaller, but it's also much closer, and they're actually the same size, which is why we can have eclipses. And so when you see it, there's a reason it looked like the moon, because A, it was really dim because by the windows, and B, it's exactly the same size. And I thought, what's going on? This is a day flight. And I looked up, and I'm like, oh no, it's the sun through the windows, which are mostly but not entirely dimmed.
Yeah,
I think although my first, I cannot remember where it was, the first Dreamliner. I think I spent 2 hours taking pictures with all the different settings, because create like hues of blue and sometimes it mauve and violets. I was like, I want to try every, and people thought I was crazy. It was with a camera. Oh, this looks really nice. We can actually almost tell as passengers the generation of Dreamliner, because the very newest one, that dimming is super fast.
Yeah.
It's
really?
super dark. The old ones is super slow, and the darkest setting you can still see a lot outside.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Oh. Yes. On the Virgin, clearly, the one on the return was much newer, because as soon as I pressed this little cute button in 2 colors, it went directly dark, like very, very quickly.
Wow, interesting.
Whereas the other one I was pressing, and you're like, is it actually working?
I wonder how much those, windows cost, because they would be an obvious thing for a car. But only recently did I hear about, there's like a new BMW electric car,
Has
and
that?
it has for its sunroof has electric dimming like that, and which makes me think it must be quite expensive.
Yeah, or there's some safety, they can't do it with safety glass.
Maybe, yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
To close off, because Alex is actually our hard stop. We still have some times, but we're above almost the 2 hours now. Wow, see? It was easy. Mark was telling us, I don't know if we will be able to talk more than 45 minutes. Well,
That was never a worry of ours.
How is that? So you mentioned in the book that you had a pause in flying because of the pandemic. How was that for you? Was it a bit?
I mean, I think for everyone who works in travel or tourism or transport, or let alone obviously many other fields, it was a really, it was a difficult time. There was a lot of uncertainty, and again, that's not confined to transport. That was worldwide in every sense. So I think maybe for 3 or 4 weeks in the sort of the most uncertain time in March or April, I guess, 2020, I didn't fly at all. And then we restarted, or I restarted, and you were flying some routes where there were very few passengers, but a lot of cargo.
Including in the cabin, or the cargo was in the cargo?
I didn't fly any flights where there was cargo in the cabin, but they were doing that. So on some aircraft, they took the seats out completely and put cargo in there, and then on others, they were netting cargo to the seats.
Yeah.
I didn't do any of those flights, but I read that 30% of the world's trade by value goes by air. And, not by weight, obviously. If you're shipping like wheat or something, you're not gonna, you're going to send it by boat. But when it comes to value, when you're like shipping laptops or phones or medicines or medical equipment, or even like obviously the stuff that was being used more often in the pandemic in terms of PPE and I never transported vaccines, but we did transport a lot of the chemicals that are used for those production. And so once there were so many, and there are dedicated cargo aircraft, but there are also, regular passenger airliners do carry a lot of cargo. And when there were so many fewer passenger flights flying, the ones that did fly got much fuller in terms of cargo. So, we just had so many flights where the cargo holds were completely full. And some flights had no passengers on them. And then
that must be weird. No?
It is weird. Yeah. In Skyfaring, actually, I did fly once a 747 back from San Francisco as a passenger and, as a freighter without any passengers on board. And I, described how eerie it was, because when we took off from the Bay Area, it was daylight. But when I did my first kind of walk around the cabin, it was already dark. And
I remember.
And all the lights are off, but they're not all, because there's still a few lights coming from the washers.
Was that the case as well with the Dreamliner?
Yeah, it was pretty similar. So
do you have any crew? Because when you have no passengers, do you still have by law like one or two or someone that?
Usually you'd have some cabin crew, but not always. So you can just fly with 2 or 3 pilots. Sometimes you'd have 4 pilots. And you could take your break in the cabin if you wanted. You could have your choice of seats.
That must be weird, though.
It's eerie. It's.
It dragged on a bit, right? I mean, until passengers
it
started
did. It did. And then recently it's been there were several stops and starts last year. As you guys know better than I, or as well as I do. But the last few months have been getting busier, and the travel sections of bookstores that I go to are full. The airports are getting busier. I think we're all really keen to reconnect and to.
May I ask, what was the first city that you flew to after that pause? Do you remember?
I think it was San Francisco.
How was that? Because Alex, I'm not asking if you cried, but Alex did cry in the first flight he took after the pause. Mine much longer. I didn't fly for a much longer time. But what was the feeling of getting back and maybe going to San Francisco? Was it like a feeling of relief, even though maybe the cabin obviously was empty? Or
I think it was.
How did you feel?
I wouldn't say I felt relief then, because it was still quite early,
right in the middle.
It was still that first spring. I think that sense. We wanted to be pilots want to fly. It's so it felt good to fly. It was astonishing how quiet the airwaves were.
And the airports?
The radio. Well, the airports are quiet too, but the radio frequencies were just you'd be sometimes the only aircraft on the frequency.
Wow.
And that was just if you're taking off from London, and often the first hour of a flight from London, it's a very complex bit of airspace, and you're speaking to many different controllers, and they're giving you new instructions, and it's quite a interactive environment. And you would take off from London, and they would say proceed directly to your oceanic route. There's
no one else there.
And that was that was not a I wouldn't describe that as a pleasant sensation, but it was certainly remarkable, and one I'll remember for the rest of my career.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm glad to see people flying again. I'll be glad to see you guys on board sometime. And
I haven't flown BA since I restarted. I will. I promise. I need to do that. I'm so very, very sorry. And but so where do you fly next? What's your next flight?
Montreal.
Nice. Yeah. I've never been to Canada, believe it or not.
You've never been to Canada? That's the most astonishing thing in this podcast.
Never.
How come you've not been to Canada?
I've never been to Canada. I know.
Canada's
I know.
It's like
I've never been to Canada.
of the world.
There you go. That's an excuse for me to fly BA, right? I need to go to Canada with you, hopefully.
That's well. When you there are large parts of it that look like Switzerland, so maybe
that's why it's not.
Maybe you could argue. I mean, basically anything in the Rockies or West is going to look like a more spacious version of Switzerland.
Very more spacious. That's also one of the reasons, and then we'll end the show. That's one of the reasons that New Zealand, for some reason, was never super high on my list, because everybody tells me when they're there, oh, it's Switzerland. I'm like, yeah, I was born in Switzerland. So I'd rather go to Colombia. Like, this dude is going next week. I'm so jealous. I'm not going to say the name of the city because I'm fuming with rage of envy of him flying to He's going to Medellin. We'll talk about that in our next show, actually, his experience. So can you imagine a city? Is it out tomorrow?
Yeah, it's out on the 12th of May here in the UK and the Commonwealth. And then it comes out in the US on the 5th of July.
For once, American friends, you have to wait, because for movies, usually it's the opposite, right? We get everything super late when you get all the movies. It's a great book. We both loved it. There's so many things we could have talk about. The way you describe and talk about Sapporo and Hokkaido I loved it as well, because I've been many times there, both in like the heavy snow of the winter and in the spring as well. It's a beautiful book. Do you call it like a follow-up to Skyfaring, or not really?
Maybe, yeah. I think it is in some ways a sequel. It's certainly, it's a more personal book, and and it talks about flying as well, because that's how I get to most of the cities I write about. So I hope that the people who enjoyed Skyfaring will enjoy getting off the plane with me and getting on the train into town.
So I guess I need to play they won't hear it. I need to play the end music, but they can keep talking, because the end music lasts, as Alex knows, the end music lasts forever. It's about a minute and a half, and usually we look at each other at the camera like, should we still talking?
I think we need to talk about the fact that you haven't been to Canada.
I'm going to get a lot of hate mail. I've like, you've never been to Canada?
Well, you won't, because Canadians are so nice.
They're like, they'll just get invitations.
What you'll get is invitations, yeah. You'll get a lot of
So Canada it is. Vancouver, apparently, because you both say it's one of the most beautiful approaches.
Yeah, or Montreal is a lovely city. You can speak your French there. And
there you go.
Yeah. Apparently, it's actually a more authentic French, because when it arrived there in the 17th century or before that, it's like Icelandic and Old Norse. It's been kind of put in amber by geography, and so practice
by Old French.
Yeah.
Say your usual happy flying. What do you say?
Safe travels.
There you go. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.